Watch on BBC iPlayer.
Every vote counts. The latest updates in a Politics Live special now on BBC Two. Elections 2024.
It's Friday, it's 12 o'clock and we're live in Westminster. A big victory for Labour in the Blackpool South by-election.
This was directly to Rishi Sunak to say we're fed up with your decline, your chaos and your division, and we want change.
Conservatives suffer big losses too in the local elections.
A disappointing night for us, but that's what you'd expect from parties in mid-term of government.
It's early days and counting continues. We're expecting a result in the race for Tees Valley Mayor in the next hour or so. Professor Sir John Curtis will be with us throughout, analysing all the electoral trends.
I'll be at the big screen crunching the numbers. There are lots of results still to come for mayors, police commissioners and councils.
I'll be talking to correspondents at counts up and down the country, politicians and commentators from across the political spectrum. With me throughout, the BBC's Deputy Political Editor Vicky Young, and at the start of today's show, Health Minister Andrea Leadsom, Labour's Deputy National Campaign Coordinator Ellie Reeves, and Liberal Democrat Deputy Leader Daisy Cooper. This is Politics Live. Yes, hello and welcome. It's going to be an extremely busy afternoon as the results tumble in from all over the country. We have 2/3 of the results from the local authorities in England still to come in. Mayoral contests from across the country. That will influence the mood, of course, within the two main parties and police and crime commissioners in England and Wales. So far, broadly speaking, it's been a bad night for the Conservatives, as expected. The question is just how bad as more results come in, and a good night for the Labour Party, which it had to be, of course, if they want these results to provide a sort of bedrock ahead of the general election. Now, that was underlined, their success in the Labour Party, and illustrated with that by-election win in Blackpool South, with a very impressive swing away from the Conservatives to Labour. As we said there in the headlines at the top of the programme, we're expecting that all-important result from Tees Valley and the mayoral contest there. Ben Houchin, who is the Tory incumbent, although seems to have done as much as he possibly can to distance himself from the Conservative brand, is hoping to hold on there, and that will be important in terms of sentiment within the Conservative Party. Well, to open the programme, I think we might be able to show you pictures actually there from the count, which we are expecting. Yes, there it is. They've been busy counting all morning. We're hoping to get a result perhaps within the next half an hour. But as I say, Ben Houchin hoping to hold on. There were reports that Labour had sort of left the scene, if you like, because they thought they hadn't done quite enough in Tees Valley. We will find out shortly when we go and hear the result. Vicky, that is the narrative in terms of bad night for the Conservatives, good night for the Labour Party. Is that going to change, do you think, that picture?
I don't think it will very much. I think even if the Conservatives have some relatively good news from those mayoral elections, there will be lots of Conservative MPs looking at their particular patch and looking at the swing from the Conservatives to Labour and thinking that potentially puts my seat in jeopardy. So in terms of a psychological boost, yes, holding on to a couple of the mayoral elections is going to help, but it's now going to be all about that reaction from Conservative MPs in terms of whether they think that Rishi Sunak should be moved on, that someone else should come in and take over. Because, of course, the difference with these elections, they are in their own right, of course, very important. You know, making these choices about who runs your council, who your local mayor is, they are important. But we have a general election coming up later this year, and there's no way of separating out those two things. So that is what's behind all of this. And Conservative MPs desperate to see, are they closing the gap on Labour in terms of the opinion polls? And equally, Labour determined to try and make those poll leads into actual real votes.
Yes, because, of course, Labour has been polling around 20 points ahead of the Conservatives. We'll see if that is broadly reflected as more results come in. And we will give you the results of some of the key councils, again, that happened overnight. And, of course, as they come in this afternoon, there has been a sort of pause this morning, obviously, while people catch up on things like sleep. But let's go to that Tees Valley count and talk to Richard Moss, the BBC's North East political editor. Hello to you, Richard. Where are we?
Hi, Joe. Well, we're pretty close to getting a result here, and it looks pretty clear now that Ben Houchen will get a third term as the Tees Valley Mayor. 4 of the 5 council areas that make up the combined authority that the mayoralty covers have declared. All 4 of them gave a significant lead to Ben Houchen, certainly enough for him to be pretty confident that the final declaration when it comes here will go his way. Now, it's not 73% as it was in 2021. He and nobody else expected that. Labour have pushed him closer, but it's clear, I'm pretty sure now that he's, barring something very strange happening, that he has won.
Now, he will have done it to some extent on his own personal appeal because there was a lot of reporting around the fact that he was trying to distance himself from the Conservative Party brand and Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. Has that been and contributed to his possible win here?
Certainly, because he has made it clear, as you say, that this is a vote about who leads locally, who's the best person for the Tees Valley. He made it quite clear this was nothing about Westminster politics. I saw a lot of his social media feed, and there were a lot of voters who would say, look, I'm never going to vote Conservative again, I'm sick of the government, but I will vote for you, Ben Houchen. And that's been borne out by the results. Hartlepool, for instance, where the Conservatives had a very bad night on the council, they lost 6 seats, Labour gained 8 and got control of that council back. Ben Houchen came on top in the council votes, in the votes there in that council area for the mayoral elections. That's a clear indication that his appeal goes beyond the Conservative Party. So I suppose Rishi Sunak will take solace from the fact there is a Conservative still capable of winning this area, but whether it means much for the parliamentary election, the MPs he needs to keep in this area, that's another matter, because Ben Houchen would see this as a very personal win and a very personal vote.
I mean, it was sort of totemic, wasn't it? Or it is still, the Tees Valley, when it came to the issue of levelling up. Very much something that Boris Johnson would claim was sort of his mantra. Is that sort of dream still alive there?
Well, I think for the Conservatives it was crucial to keep hold of Ben Houchen, because otherwise who's going to shout up for levelling up? Who's actually going to deliver on the ground, potentially, developments that the MPs, that the government can point to as evidence that it is making a difference? Now, there are obviously a lot of disputes about whether enough difference is being made in this area. There's a lot of poverty still. There are a lot of areas of clear deprivation. And one of the arguments during the campaign was enough of any of the kind of big developments, for instance, the regeneration of that steelworks site, really filtered down at the moment to ordinary people in this area. But to have someone waving the flag here was crucial. So if Ben Houchen had lost, that probably was the last hope, really, for Conservative MPs here, who've been keener, I have to say, to attach themselves to the colours of Ben Houchen, what he's doing, perhaps, than what's going on in Westminster.
Richard Moss there in Tees Valley, thank you very much. And, of course, we'll go straight back to the count when we have sight of a result. Andrea Leadsom, it is quite something, isn't it, to hear there from Richard Moss, and the evidence was very clear from the campaign literature, that Ben Houchen was divorcing himself pretty well from the Conservative Party brand because of where it is in the polls, languishing 20 points behind. What does it say?
Well, I completely disagree with the analysis that's just been put forward. Ben Houchen is the absolutely archetypal Conservative in his views, creating opportunities, creating growth, working his socks off for his local communities. And likewise, many, many hundreds of Conservatives, including many Conservative MPs, have been up in the Tees Valley campaigning for him to get him over the line. So if he wins today, I think what that says is 2 things. One is that our policy, Rishi Sunak's policy of levelling up, is working. People are listening, and Ben Houchen has delivered for Tees Valley. But the other thing I think is that, Labour have been very smug about last night. And of course, they would have hoped very strongly to have won Tees Valley if they want to have their, as Angela Rayner called it in Harlow, which they also lost, their pathway to power. So I don't think Labour has much to be smug about when they see a result like Tees Valley, which is at the heart of Conservative levelling up.
Ellie?
I don't think the Labour Party are smug about anything. We've fought for every vote at this set of mayoral and local elections. We fought for every vote in Blackpool. In Blackpool, we saw the 3rd highest swing from the Tories to Labour in a post-war by-election, and we're really pleased about that, but we're not complacent about what it means. So I don't think there's a smugness there. The thing about Ben Houchin is that he did run a campaign that was very much distancing himself from the Conservative Party and the Conservative branding. You know, if you look at his social media posts and his leaflets, it would be difficult to tell that he was actually standing under a Conservative ticket.
But no, that's not right, Ellie, because everybody knew he was a Conservative. What they were doing is exactly what voters should do, and that is to look at the track record and to look at the Labour opponent and think, is that person going to deliver? No. So if people have chosen to vote for Ben Houchin, it's because of his delivery as a Conservative on the levelling up agenda. It's not something to do with his social media. That's just nonsense.
I mean, Andrea, when it comes to other parts of the country, it will be a bright spot. There's no doubt about it for the Conservatives.
As is Harlow.
If Ben Houchin wins. And yes, you're holding on to Harlow.
And let's not...
You're not seats in Harlow, though.
Which
no, but the point is,
get.
Labour, actually, Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer were there just a couple of days ago, and Keir Starmer says we need to win in places like Harlow if we're to form the next government.
But they are winning.
But we did win council seats.
They're winning in
but they did not win Harlow.
They're winning in Hartlepool and they're winning in Thurrock. That's spread right across the country. And that idea, you were a key player, Andrea, in the Brexit campaign and formulating a historic alliance with former Labour heartlands, like the ones I've just mentioned, in the North West and in the North East and part of Boris Johnson's cabinet. Do you accept that alliance is broken? If you've lost councils in Thurrock, if you've lost them in Hartlepool, yes, you won that by-election in 2021, it's gone.
So it's been a really tough night for the Conservatives. And first, I'd just like to thank all of those amazing ex-councillors and candidates who've worked their socks off over many years and over the campaign for their communities. It's been very tough for them.
Let down by the National Party.
Well, but equally, it is understandable. You know, post-COVID, post-Ukraine invasion, we've seen a cost of living crisis unprecedented. The pandemic was unprecedented. And what we have now, after many years of supporting people, we now have sort of a hangover of inflation, of people feeling very fed up with the lack of recovery.
You've been in government all during that time.
Totally agree. But the point is that people feel fed up. So I totally understand why they're either staying at home and sitting on their hands. But what I don't think last night is showing is that there's a massive love for Labour.
Well, let's see. I mean, Ellie, what do you say about that? It is about sealing the deal. I'll just show you one result that's come in from Swindon. Labour have held on to it. I think we can just show you there 29 seats required for a majority, and they're on 41. The Labour Party, the Conservatives, a long way behind. They're on 15. So a Labour hold there in Swindon. We can show you the share, which is always important. You can see Labour have added, the seat change have added 9 and the Conservatives have lost 9. It is a pattern that is being reflected in a number of councils across the country. But in terms of sealing the deal, this is about proving that Labour is not just picking up from people who are fed up with the Conservatives, but that actually people are voting with enthusiasm in those parts of the country. They need to win at a general election.
Yeah, and I've spent time in Blackpool, I spent time in Thurrock, and a number of Rushmore that was declared last night. And, you know, I speak to voters on the doorstep there, and it's not just that they're fed up after 14 years of the Conservatives and the cost of living and NHS waiting lists and all the rest of it, but actually they're listening to the positive offer that Labour have got to put forward.
Which is what, Ellie?
Well, there's a number of things that we've set out. First of all, financial stability is the first thing. You know, under the Conservatives, we had
to 3.2%.
Under the Conservatives, we had the mini budget that crashed the economy. It sent mortgages skyrocketing. People are still paying £100 more a month.
Let her respond.
People are paying £100 more a month in their mortgages, whereas we've said, you know, economic security, everything being fully costed, having a beefed-up OBR to make sure that we're financially secure is at the heart of everything that we would do. And that resonates with voters. They want that stability. They haven't had it under the Conservatives.
Well, we can ask that question this afternoon about what it means, and we can see how it's reflected in the results. Let's go to Daisy Cooper for the Liberal Democrats. You've held on to the councils that were already Liberal Democrat. Where are you hoping to make gains?
Well, we're expecting results later on today from places like Tunbridge Wells and from Wokingham, and we're very hopeful that we can make some significant gains in both of those places. They're both councils that are currently in no overall control. But what we can see overall is that we are on a winning streak. Our winning streak is continuing. We've seen that we've consolidated our position in places like Winchester, for example, where we've won more council seats. We've held on to Eastleigh as a council as well. Now David Cameron even has a Liberal Democrat councillor, we found out not long ago. So we are making those significant gains, particularly in those places where we're really keen to, and where we're ideally positioned to win seats off the Conservatives at the next general election.
All right, let me just bring you another result here, and this is from Norwich. It is a Labour gain. They did actually have it in the past. They only needed to win back a few seats to actually hold it. Again, it was hung, but you can see there Labour Party on 20 and the Greens with a strong performance there on 14. If we show you there the seats that have changed hands, Labour have lost one, the Greens have gained one, but that is a Labour gain from no overall control there in Norwich. Let's get a sort of overview of where we are in terms of the seats and the number of councillors with my colleague Nick Eardley.
Hi, Joe. Yeah, it kind of reflects the conversation you were just having, actually, because if you look at the tally we've got so far, 38 of 107 councils in so far. This keeps changing in the last few minutes. But you can see Labour are doing pretty well, maybe not quite as well as they could have, but they are up 65 seats. In the last few minutes, the Lib Dems have just overtaken the Conservatives, actually, in terms of how many seats they've won so far. Obviously, a long way to go. But that number that the Conservatives are on there, down 142, that is really, really bad. As things stand, they are on course to lose about half of the seats they're defending, which would be at the upper end of their worst fears. So it's a bad picture for the Conservatives at the moment. Have a look at this. This is what it means in terms of councils that have changed hands so far. Labour are up 4, the Conservatives are down 3. Norwich, you were just discussing there, is the hung council that's gone to Labour. But when you're in the party HQs on a day like this, you're trying to figure out what this means for the national picture. And that is really bad for the Conservatives. Down 14 based on 2021. 2021, they had a bit of a bounce from the vaccine rollout. Boris Johnson was on a bit of a high, but that's still a bad result so far. You can see there that Labour are up 5%. Pretty good. Again, maybe not quite as good as they would have hoped. What does it all mean for Westminster elections is the question a lot of people will be wondering today. And we've got a bit of a sense with the by-election in Blackpool South, which was very good for Labour, very bad for the Conservatives. Have a look there. 7,600 majority for Chris Webb. So interesting, I think, that Reform came within 117 votes of beating the Tories into second place. That will really worry Conservatives in parts of the country where they think Reform could pose them a problem. There's what happened to the vote. The Conservative vote down massively, almost a third. Labour the main beneficiaries on that one. But I think this is my graphic of the day so far, because that is a huge, colossal swing. 26% from the Conservatives to Labour, the third biggest swing since the Second World War. Joe, you'll know the other two bigger swings were in recent by-elections as well. If you're a Tory MP waking up this morning, or it's afternoon now, isn't it? If you're a Tory MP sitting down for your lunch this afternoon and you're wondering what on earth do all these results mean for me, that's really going to worry you.
Well, as you say, it's been a long night, of course. It is the afternoon now with that Blackpool South by-election being declared overnight. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. But this set of local elections and mayoral contests and police and crime commissioners, the last major electoral test before a general election that could be within a matter of months. And there has been talk on this programme about any threat to Rishi Sunak's leadership in terms of being the head of a Conservative party still languishing in the polls and what these elections might do to that threat. Well, let's hear from the Prime Minister himself. He's in his part of the country in North Yorkshire. Let's listen to Rishi Sunak.
Obviously, it's disappointing to lose good, hard-working Conservative councillors, and I'm grateful to them for all their service in local government, keeping council tax low and delivering services for local people. But we've still got lots of results to come as well. And there are also things that I would point to. Harlow, for example, where Keir Starmer held a rally just on Wednesday saying that was a place that he had to win to be on track to win a general election. That hasn't happened, and indeed we're still waiting for the result in the Tees Valley mayoralty just near to here, which is obviously a very important test as well.
Rishi Sunak there talking up, of course, Harlow, because it was one of those areas that the Conservatives held onto despite a threat there from Labour. He's in North Yorkshire in his constituency, and we're waiting, of course, for the result of a new mayoral contest, a new mayoral post, which is York and North Yorkshire. Hopefully we'll get that this afternoon. But let's find out where we are in terms of the state of the parties with our elections expert, Sir John Curtis. Welcome to you. Or just before we go to you, let's just show you this has just come in from Blackburn. Labour have held on to it. They needed 26 seats required for a majority. They got 29 and independents were 13. But let's have a look at actually what happens in terms of seats that have changed hands. Well, they've lost 4 and independents have gained 8. Now, that is because there had also been resignations prior to these local elections of Labour councillors who have quit over the issue of the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. And you can see those independents, the number of seats have gone up by 8, but Blackburn is still a Labour hold. Just a quick response from you, Ellie. That is a pattern that has been replicated in parts of the country with large Muslim populations. Numbers of Labour councillors quitting. Just how worried are you about that trend? It's a reminder that particular issues can be very damaging electorally.
Yeah, I mean, independents always do better in local elections than, for example, at general elections. But we know that there's work to do to build trust with the Muslim community, and we know how much people feel very strongly about what's happening in Gaza and the devastation there. So we recognise there is work to do, Joe, in relation to this issue, and we'll continue to engage with communities and build back that trust.
All right, let's talk.
Just very yes. That, just for 1 second, that in our political editor in the West Midlands is saying that Labour are briefing there that they believe that they're going to be defeated in the West Midlands mayoral race. We're not going to get the result of that until tomorrow. That's Andy Street. And they're citing the independent candidate, Ahmed Yaqub, who stood on a pro-Gaza ticket, saying that has been a major factor. And there's a bit of a row brewing there. A senior party, Labour Party source has said it's the Middle East, not the West Midlands, that will have won Andy Street the contest. Once again, Hamas are the real villains. A Conservative source has gone back to our political editor there, saying that that quote is vile, and they insist that the contest is extremely close. Yeah. So that issue coming up certainly there as well.
Is that the language that people should be using?
This is the first time I've heard this.
That is the language
this quote, and we need to see what happens in the election in the West Midlands. I was in the West Midlands yesterday campaigning, and it wasn't where I was the issue that was coming up on the doorstep.
Right, but is that the language that Labour candidates, Labour councillors, Labour mayoral candidates should be using?
Well, it's not the language that I would personally use, but, we need to see what happens with that result and analyse, them when they come out. But we haven't seen those results yet, Joe.
All right, let's turn to Sir John Curtis and get an overview, if you like, of the state of the parties at this stage. Welcome to you, John. Of course, we've got a lot more results to come in. But the importance of these elections, these local elections, they're important, of course, in their own right, electing local councillors, but they're important because we are up against a general election, which could be a matter of months away.
Indeed, though, we need to be careful about that. I mean, the first thing to say, absolutely, is that local elections don't necessarily forecast what's going to happen in a general election in 6 months' time. But what they are useful for is as a barometer, though sometimes a rather complex barometer, of where we are at present. Because although it's undoubtedly true that not everybody votes the same way in local elections as they would in a general election, and that particularly helps the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, Independents, etc. However, the ups and downs of party fortunes, particularly for the Conservatives and Labour, do tend to parallel the ups and downs in other indicators such as parliamentary by-elections and in the opinion polls. And the crucial message that has come out of the bulk of the evidence overnight is that really very little has changed in the last 12 months. And what we've seen today is very redolent of what we've been seeing throughout the last 12 months. That is that it looks as though Conservative support may be down a bit on last year. Labour may be edged slightly up. Liberal Democrats may be slightly down, but nothing really has changed. But of course, that's what the opinion polls have been telling us. The opinion polls have been telling us that the Conservative Party has not made any significant progress in narrowing Labour's lead. Equally, I mean, we've now got rather used to these parliamentary by-elections and we get spectacular swings. You know, Blackpool South was the third biggest swing ever from Conservative to Labour in a post-war parliamentary by-election. But we've now had 5 parliamentary by-elections in which the swing has been over 20%. I mean, we've never had a parliament with so many, not even between 1992 and 1997. So although it's always understandable, it's always part of the game that we play at this stage of a election night and election day, for parties who are not doing so well to cherry pick the odd result where they do well, we do have to acknowledge that the broad swathe of the evidence basically is sending a message that the Conservative project of trying to reduce Narrow's Labour lead doesn't seem to be making any progress. And as you've pointed out, there's only 6 months to go. Now, maybe in the 6 months they can achieve what they've not managed to achieve in the 16 months or so since Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister. But change is required and the clock is ticking.
Can we talk about the mayoral contests? Because we are about to get the result from Tees Valley. The indications are that the incumbent Conservative candidate Ben Houchen will hold on there. Now, it's difficult to read across from party success from a mayoral contest, but it does provide a huge boost to morale, doesn't it? And sentiment within the party in terms of who holds on to these big mayoralties.
Yeah, I mean, the strength and the weakness of these metro mayor contests, so far as local elections are concerned, is that they can sometimes be about big personalities. And Ben Houchen and Andy Street are big personalities. We've known from the very first such mayoral contest in London in 2000 that it can produce results that completely cut across the party system, i.e. Ken Livingstone's victory in London in 2000. So they're attractive, they're interesting, they've got personality.
And can I just interrupt you, because I think we can say now Ben Houchen has taken that mayoralty or held on to it. So the Conservative candidate, Ben Houchen, has won in the Tees Valley. Please continue.
Sure. But the point is that because they have big personalities, personalities can sometimes win on the basis of the personal vote. And I mean, so far as the Tees Valley is concerned, we've seen opinion polling that said that Ben Houchen had a good chance of winning, but which at the same time said, but he was going to get about 7 or 8% more of the vote than the Conservative Party would when people were asked how they would vote in a general election. And also just bear in mind, in that area, the Labour Party just managed to win control of Hartlepool. So the truth is the mayoral contests are probably the least reliable guide to the question you asked me at the beginning of this conversation, which is what do these results tell us for a general election? It is the results that happen to anonymous councillors that across the piece and across the country that tell us much, much more about the ups and downs of parties as parties, as opposed to the impact or otherwise of particular high-profile personalities that might be able to buck the trend in a particular kind of contest.
So, John Curtis, thank you very much for the moment. But let's just get brief reaction. We're saying that Ben Houchen has won in the Tees Valley. He's held on to it. This will be his 3rd term.
Fantastic news.
Obviously,
brilliant.
This is the bright spot for you. And I probably should, at this point, introduce our new guest, Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun. Despite that, you heard what Sir John Curtis said. They're not easily identifiable in terms of how a party might perform at a general election. What is the mood within the Conservative Party?
Look, they've had a spanking last night. It's pretty clear that it's at the upper end of the worst-case scenario predictions, and no amount of sort of pre-spin can really change the fact that I think if you look at those numbers, the Lib Dems are actually getting ahead of the Tories right now. Blackpool, yes, they didn't make it into second. Sorry, they did stay in second. They but only by 100 votes. And actually it shows Reform polling higher than their national levels. So they're getting it from both sides. They're getting it from Labour and Reform. So
yes.
Not fun.
We will go when the count actually makes the declaration in Tees Valley. But as I'm saying, we are calling it that Ben Houchen has won there. Let's talk about Blackpool South. I mean, the size of the swing is enormous, impressive by historic standards. But, as Harry Cole has just mentioned, Reform were almost within 100 votes of the Conservatives. How worried are you about that?
Well, actually, I would have loved to have asked Sir John Curtis about that himself, because he's talking about this huge swing. But, of course, the last time there wasn't a Reform candidate. And as you've just said, Reform were snapping at the heels of the Conservatives. And obviously, Reform voters would potentially, as an alternative, choose to vote Conservative on the whole. So I'd be interested to know what that says about the swing. So it might be, statistically a huge swing, but Reform, what that says to me is that we need to do much more to win back our Reform voters.
So what would you change? What would you change then? Are you saying that the rebels on the right of the Conservative Party
I wouldn't
have
call
a
them
point?
rebels, Jo.
Well, they are. Two of them have put letters in of no confidence.
Oh, I see.
To
You mean
Rishi Sunak's
MPs,
leadership,
not Reform voters.
Oh, no, sorry. Rebels in the Conservative Party. That they are right in terms of changing policy and changing policy now.
Well, what I actually think is that Rishi Sunak is totally focused on the things that really matter to people. So creating the conditions for inflation to come down, having a £900 tax cut for working people.
But it's clearly not feeding through, is it, to voters?
It's all
everywhere.
very recent. And as I said at the start, the challenge we have right now is after the COVID pandemic, after the cost of living crisis where inflation hit 11%, people are not yet feeling that they're in a good place. And so it's understandable that people are fed up. But we also do need to look at, in 2021, the Conservatives were at a high point because there had been this huge support for the public, for jobs,
for Boris
millions
Johnson.
of jobs.
Is the answer change the leader?
No, millions of jobs were saved, thousands of businesses were saved. We'd rolled out the COVID vaccine faster than anyone else in Europe. People were on a high, and that translated with Rishi as Chancellor into support for the Conservatives.
I mean, the thing is,
the other question for John Curtis.
Well, never mind
is that
about
one.
questioning John Curtis. I'll ask him. But that does leave people with the feeling that it was better under Boris Johnson if you're a Conservative voter.
That wasn't the point I was making at all, Jo.
I'm not sure whether that's the fantasy of some politicians and on the right of the Tory party that he could come back, I think, is fairly delusional this side of an election. Let's not remember why he had to go in the end, which was he couldn't form a government. So I don't think that is the answer. One thing that has surprised me, though, this morning is even the people that put the letters in, the Andrew Jenkins of this world, are saying, you know what, we haven't got the numbers. And it's a numbers game.
Yes, and that is definitely a feeling that has come across in a number of interviews that actually time's run out.
So, the time to change the leader, if they were going to do it, was in January. In a weird way, actually, Sunak has spent the last 2 weeks actually buying off different bits of the possible rebellion. The defence ministers, the former defence ministers who were all up in arms about defence spending. He was saying the right things on benefits for the right of the party, and Rwanda might just, take off. Who knows?
It's such a key policy. You're kind of belittling this.
Let me just bring you. I know you all want to cover, but let me just bring you the result, since we've been talking about it, and that is the Tees Valley result, the mayoral contest. There we can see, when we put up the figures, you're looking at pictures there from the count, that Ben Houchen has won on nearly 82,000. To Chris McEwen, the Labour candidate, there on just over 63,000, and the Liberal Democrat there quite a long way behind. Now, let's have a look at the share of the vote there. 54% for the Conservatives, but what you have to remember, in 2021 it was 73%. That is a big drop there, but still a win for Ben Houchen, and 41% there for Labour. We can see how the share has changed. We can see a drop there of 19% for Ben Houchen there in the Tees Valley, and Labour are up 14%. Not enough to take it, but they're up by 14%. The Liberal Democrats are up to 5%, and we can see the swing there from Conservatives to Labour of 17%. But in the end, Ellie Reeves, it wasn't enough.
it was a very, very hard challenge to win the mayoralty in the Tees Valley. And we talked earlier on the programme about Ben Houchin's campaign and him distancing himself from the Conservative Party. But if you look at the results, the swing to Labour there, you know, that majority that Ben Houchin had, 73% of the vote last time.
But that only underlines how badly Labour were doing at that point. You were right then at your lowest point in 2020.
Well, if you look to the swing to us and actually thinking about a number of the battleground seats in that mayoralty area...
Let's go to Tees Valley and hear it.
Ladies and gentlemen, as combined authority returning officer appointed for the election for the Mayor of the Tees Valley Combined Authority on Thursday the 2nd of May 2024, I hereby certify that the total number of votes cast for each candidate was as follows. Houchin, Ben, Conservative Party candidate, 81,930. McEwen, Christopher Paul, commonly known as McEwen Chris, Labour and Cooperative Party candidate, 63,141. Thorley, Simon Christopher, commonly known as Thorley Simon, Democrats, 7,679. The total number of votes cast was 152,750. The number of ballot papers rejected were as follows. 2 for one official mark, 118 for voting for more than one candidate, 2 for writing or mark by which the voter could be identified, and 719 unmarked or void for uncertainty, leaving a total of 841 rejected ballot papers. The total number of ballot papers verified was 153,591, which gives us a turnout of 30.80%. I therefore give notice that Houchin Ben, Conservative Party candidate, is duly elected as Mayor for the Tees Valley Combined Authority.
Well, big cheer there for Ben Houchin, even if he has lost quite a bit of his share of the vote. He has held on. It'll be a third term for him. Let's listen to what he has to say.
Firstly, I want to thank all of the staff, the returning officer, the police and everybody involved in the camp. Thank you and to everybody last night who came to the verification as well. We were very, very late in the verification. Everybody in the polling stations, you've done an incredible job, and the returning officer in the Stockton Council should be extremely proud of the election, so thank you for that. When it comes to the election, I just want to say that I am absolutely humbled by everybody that voted for me. Teesside is a place where I was born. I grew up, other than a very short sabbatical to Newcastle for 4 years, and then I came straight back. It's a place where I'm going to be for the rest of my life. And to be re-elected for a third term in my home, in my community, is absolutely the greatest honour that anybody could ever give me. So I want to thank anybody that voted for me. It's a very, very proud day. I'm delighted. Thank you for giving me your backing. Thank you for backing me over the last 7 years, and thank you for backing my plan for the next 4 years. We've done a very positive campaign. We've tried to show a clear vision of what we want for our area. We're trying to show how we can change our region for the better. Because let's be clear, there's still a long way.
Let's leave Ben Houchin there. It is all a little bit echoey, as is often the case when these counts are being done. Obviously, thanking everybody, a very personal appeal. No mention of the Conservative Party nationally or of the Prime Minister.
No, not so far. Maybe he was going to come on to
Might
that.
have been.
I think what's interesting about this is the idea of, you know, the local personality, if you like, which is partly the point of the mayors, these big leaders, these big figures. So he's managed to withstand a significant swing away from the Conservative Party to Labour. Now, if you look at the parliamentary seats in that area, that makes a lot of them very vulnerable. Ironically, the one that probably isn't might be to Simon Clarke, who's, you know, very, very critical of Rishi Sunak.
And called for
the
him,
others,
in fact,
but the others so far are sounding still pretty loyal and saying this is not the time to get rid of Rishi Sunak. But, you know, I don't mean to be rude about the egos of MPs, but a lot of them might think that, look, I'm quite a big name in my area. You know, I've been around for a while. I might be, you know, a cabinet minister or something. I could also withstand this kind of shift. It doesn't really happen It doesn't really happen in general elections. It's a very hard thing to
The other thing
do.
you've got to remember with Ben Houchen, it's not just Ben Houchen's personality. It's about £3 billion worth of Treasury cash has gone into that, TC, which obviously does help. And that's the way it works. If he's a good mayor, he's lobbied for it. But you cannot underestimate the amount of investment that has gone into Teesside.
And there has been quite a lot of controversy, though, Harry Cole, about the Teesworks regeneration.
Yeah, quite a bit of it stirred up by Labour, though, which is a little unfairly.
Well, I mean, just to underline what Vicky has been saying, I mean, this is really the first sort of Conservative silver lining, if you like, in these elections. And although Ben Houchen's vote has fallen by 19% since 2021, that was when he got 73%, his performance is still 14% above what he achieved in the first contest. He's been the only mayor of Tees Valley in 2017. And the polling shows that support for Conservatives in the area in a general election was 21% lower than support recorded for Houchen. So this win is down to his personal popularity, Andrea. That must be worrying.
So I think that whole little bit of discussion is absolutely pathetic from the BBC. This is a superb... you and Vicky.
Yeah, no, but
that is pathetic. He's won.
Hang on,
all
Andrea,
you're saying is he's had this big swing away from him.
Big indignation.
No, I'm sorry. No, I am indignant. Yes, you are.
No one is taking away from Ben Houchen.
Harry's just tried to suggest he's had a £3 billion bung from the Treasury.
Well, he has.
This is all credit to a mayor who's done an absolutely brilliant job in a key part of the levelling up agenda for this government.
Under pressure,
this is an absolute testament to the Conservative government and to the levelling up agenda that have backed Ben Houchen, and it is absolute testament to him as a good Conservative, his focus on his area, his support for his communities in negotiating to win, to apply for the funding that is available for the levelling up programme.
You've made your speech, but actually we can show exactly why it's not down necessarily to the Conservative government. This was his poster. My promise to you, or one of them, I'll deliver flights to Malaga and Tenerife from Teesside Airport. Nothing about the Conservative Party. Hang on. And nothing about Rishi Sunak. No one is taking away from his victory, his personal victory. But the evidence, Andrea, is very clear that it was despite the Conservatives and not necessarily because of them. This is another one. We're backing Ben. Where's the Tory logo? Where's Rishi Sunak? Where's the Conservative Party in that?
So are you asserting, Jo, that nobody knew he was a Conservative?
No, I'm sure they did. And what they said to him was, we're voting for you, as we heard from our political editor in the North East, Andrea, but we won't be voting Conservative.
That's your assertion.
No. Well, that's what the political editor said in the North East.
Oh, that must be true then.
But we won't be voting Conservative in the general election.
This is a fantastic victory.
Yes,
and it demonstrates what hard work and our levelling up policy is achieving around the country. More jobs, more growth, more opportunities for people.
There's other evidence in other parts of the country. I mean, out in Dorset, for example, where Liberal Democrats are campaigning really hard, and we hope to see that we make some gains later today when the results come out. Down in Dorset, the Conservatives were putting out leaflets saying that they were distancing themselves from the National Conservatives. Their leaflets actually said, we want to distance ourselves from the chaos of Westminster. We've got Conservative parties around the country in this set of elections calling themselves the local Conservatives, saying, please don't punish us for what National Conservatives are doing in Westminster.
This is not a new phenomenon in British politics, is it? How many Labour MPs had Jeremy Coburn on there? I mean, come on. Well, you fight the battle in front of you. That's politics. Right. The idea that we're suddenly shocked at the idea.
It still makes the point that there are Conservatives in this election who are trying to distance themselves from the embarrassment of Rishi Sunak. That's the point we're making.
But on that, Ellie Reeves, you should have perhaps taken that mayoralty. Labour were dominant in the Tees Valley once upon a time and in the whole area of Teesside. And the Conservatives took that from you. They took it and he now holds on to it, Ben Houchen. Conservative or otherwise, Labour did not win.
Well, look, it felt a lot of the time like Ben Houchen was fighting a campaign against the Conservatives. You didn't see any mention of him.
I've done that.
Sure. But so were we. So I don't know that it's quite the victory that Andrea is saying that it is for the Conservative Party. Nevertheless, there's also a swing to Labour in that set of results. And if you extrapolate that to the swing that's needed to win the battleground seats in Tees Valley at the general election, Redcar, Darlington, Stockton seat, actually, on that swing, I think we'd take those seats. So, although we didn't take the mayoralty, we've certainly gained a great deal of ground in an area where we need to win seats at the general election. But it goes back to the point, we don't take any votes for granted. We're not complacent about anything, and we'll continue to work hard and speak to people in that Tees Valley area so they can put our trust in us at the general election.
Because, as I say, Andrea, when you look at areas like Hartlepool, that was a very low point in 2021. For the Labour Party. In fact, it's reported that Keir Starmer considered quitting at that point. So bad was it in terms of local election results and losing that by-election in Hartlepool. But Labour have taken it. They've taken Hartlepool, and so they should. But what does it mean for your Conservative Party when they are losing the sorts of councils in areas that you won in those post-Brexit years? That alliance is crumbling.
Well, I think what it shows for us is that we need to get the message out there about the attempts that the government is really making to recover inflation to levels previously experienced, you know, the 2% target for the Bank of England, to put more money into people's pockets through the tax cuts that give 900.
To you now? Because we've been doing this since January.
Well, I think it's still very recent, and as I've said earlier, I think people are fed up. You know, we've had this terrible pandemic, we've had the energy crisis, the cost of living crisis, all of these things.
All this time.
No, but all of these things are once in 100 year. Once in 100 year events, global events. If you look around the world, other economies are also struggling. Our growth has been better than many others in the G7 and in Europe. And I understand that. No, but I understand that, which is why I'm saying that's why people are fed up. And if you compare, a lot of these seats were last fought in 2021, which is when the reverse was true. We'd come out of lockdown, we'd just managed to vaccinate all of our population, people's jobs and livelihoods had been supported by a Conservative government.
In 2021,
that's because we're now facing...
the vote was for whoever was running the country in Scotland, Wales and
All right, hang on, Andrea. Let me just get a bit more analysis from you, Harry. In terms of what Andrea is saying, there isn't long until a general election. What's going to have to change in order to narrow that gap? The poll lead nationally of 20 points. Locally, we are seeing these losses in key parts of the country, whether it's in Hartlepool, Thurrock, Redditch, Rushmore.
I think what the problem that the government have now is even the most optimistic people within the Tory party who were saying, look, I'm looking at that 20-point poll lead and I just don't buy it. I don't believe it. In my patch, it feels fine. But now we've got what John Curtis there very elegantly said. You've basically got a party that, if they were on a similar poll level, this is exactly how they'd be performing. So it is going to be a bit of a wake-up call. It's been a long wake-up call to happen. But I think the issue is now the party are in a bind. They're blocked in by reform on one side. They're losing voters to Labour, and they've left it too late to do anything about it.
Let me just show you these pictures that have been running. It's George Galloway, who is the MP for Rochdale for the Workers' Party of Britain. You can just see the back of him there, wearing the hat at the count in Rochdale. Of course, that was something of a disaster for the Labour Party, that he won that seat in a by-election. He said he was doing it for Gaza. There have been councillors quitting the Labour Party. Ellie, what's your prediction for Rochdale?
I'm not going to make predictions for Rochdale. And, you mentioned the Rochdale by-election. We, of course, couldn't stand a candidate in that by-election.
It was a bit of a disaster.
And we took the decision to not stand there, which was regrettable. And we will move to making sure that we've got a candidate in place for Rochdale to go on and fight the general election.
Right. I mean, again, this is a part of the country, usually very traditionally Labour, but is being challenged very much either by independents or, in this case, the Workers' Party for Britain.
Yeah, and we talked before about the fact that independents generally fare better in local elections than they do in general elections. But likewise, I said that we know that we need to rebuild trust with the Muslim community, and that's something that we're working really hard on.
Let's just show you the result in Welwyn, Hatfield. I think we could show... I don't think we've got the full result. Because, actually, I should remind ourselves and viewers that many of these councils are not up in total. They're not sort of have all their seats being elected. They are up in what we call 2/3. That makes it more difficult for one or other party to take control. Sometimes they can stay as they were. But here it is in Welwyn Hatfield. It is a hung parliament, no overall control, 25 required for a majority. Labour on 20, the Liberal Democrats there on 15, the Conservatives on 11. But if we show you the seats that have changed hands, again, a sort of salutary lesson there in Welwyn Hatfield, and the local MP there, or not far away, is Grant Shapps, the Conservative MP. It's hung, but Labour have gone up by 8, Liberal Democrats by 2, and the Conservatives have dropped by 10. If we have a look at the share, it's quite close there, 32% for Labour, 21% for the Liberal Democrats and 35% there for the Conservatives. This, Vicky, again, it's going to make Conservative MPs who hold the seats either in or close to these key councils nervous.
Yeah, that's Grant Shapps' parliamentary seat, isn't it? So that's another one. And as you say, it's all really feeds into the mood of Conservative MPs who, yes, they will be happy about any victories in the mayoral elections, of course they will, but they will then be looking at the shares of the vote and the direction of travel. And I think what's frustrating and worrying them so much is that there doesn't seem to be any sign of that gap closing between Labour and the Conservatives. So all the levers that Rishi Sunak's pulling, he's trying all sorts of things, it just doesn't seem to be making any difference. They just feel like the electorate have stopped listening to them. Now, we're not in the general election campaign yet. So what they say to me is that they're now holding out hope that, look, people aren't that interested at the moment. You know, of course, these kind of things, the turnout's much lower in local elections, and they're hoping that when it comes to a general election, people will focus more, that there will be more questioning of Labour and Labour's policies and what they would do in government, and they hope that that is what is going to save them. But as you were saying, these are real votes being made here, and it's not looking good for the Conservatives.
Every time, Joe, you'll know this, every time a politician comes on you ask them about polls on television, they say, oh, well, the only polls that matter, well, here it is, laid bare.
Except, of course, people can vote differently.
Sure.
In local elections. These are local elections, it's not the general election, it's just that the temperature of England and Wales, or parts of it, because everyone has an election somewhere in England and Wales, the temperature is being tested here. Liberal Democrats quite often are overrepresented, let's put it that way, in local elections. It doesn't translate necessarily into the number of seats that you would like to see at a general election. But so far, you're definitely holding your position. You would need to be taking some councils, though, wouldn't you, Daisy, to be putting a bit more pressure on the Conservatives if you want to improve your tally at the general election?
Well, as you know, we're in second place to the Conservatives in around 80 seats around the country, and those are the seats in which we're campaigning really hard and hope to win seats off the Conservatives when the general election is finally called. We have so far consolidated our position in places like Stockport, in Winchester, in Eastleigh, and it may well be that by the end of today, we still think we've got the best may yet still be to come. There may be a couple of other places, some other places around the country that by the end of today we may have gained those councils, and if we do, that will be a sure sign that we're set to win more seats off the Conservatives when the general election finally comes.
I mean, the other important thing is historic context in terms of where governing parties are and oppositions are this close to a general election. Labour have done well. There's no doubt about it, Ellie. They've done well, but you were expected to do well. It's not spectacular as yet in terms of if you look at the sort of local elections in 1995, in 1996 that led to a landslide under Tony Blair. Does that worry you a bit?
But actually, if you look at this sort of stage in electoral cycle, and by the way, I was interested that Richard Holden said that this was mid-term elections.
Five to midnight, more like, yeah.
It's a kind of a general election any time.
Andrea hasn't used
No, that's right. But actually, governing parties would normally do better at this stage because there's normally a pre-election bounce, as the party of government does their pre-election budget, as they set out their pre-election, kind of policy giveaway, and that hasn't happened. So you would actually expect the governing party to have a bounce rather than go backwards, which seems to be happening with this set of results for the Conservatives.
Well, and that's a fair point, isn't it?
Well,
I mean, what are you going to change?
Because we don't have a manifesto out, Joe. So in that sense,
how close do we have to be to see those polls change?
Well, it's not really that. so much as I just don't agree with what Ellie says, which is that you'd see a bounce because we'd have set out our manifesto, which we clearly haven't done. But what we are seeking to do is to cut taxes and to see real wages rising and so on. So completely right, it's not mid-term. But on the other hand, I mean, what I would genuinely like John Curtis to opine on is the fact that in 2021 we massively outperformed.
It was a high watermark.
So actually, you know, this result is a function of that high watermark. And I would be interested genuinely to know whether taking that into account, are these results as disastrous, or is it in fact the case that a lot of Conservatives are sitting on their hands at the moment because they're a bit fed up and actually will come out? And turnover is a very important point here too. You know, we've seen in some of these local council turnouts as low as sort of 30%. I mean, in Blackpool South, I think it was 32%.
It hasn't been particularly low. I mean, a little bit lower perhaps in the Tees Valley, but not by much, because you know, Andrea, local elections, important though they are, particularly this close to a general election, don't tend to see high turnout. So we're going to get the all-important, of course, projected national share later on in the afternoon, when that will give us an estimate, and it is an estimate, as to how, if people had voted the same way nationally, where the parties are. And that will be very important in terms of the gap between Labour and the Conservatives, and exactly what sort of percentage of vote share you have, and of course for the Liberal Democrats too, and other parties. Just briefly, Vicky, you may be able to bring us...
There's just a couple of things from our political editors around the country.
Yes.
As you know, there are lots of them are at Counts and all the rest of it. The BBC political editor in Yorkshire is reporting that some of the smaller parties there are saying they think Labour have won the York and North Yorkshire mayor. Labour, though, aren't saying this, so it's certainly not confirmed in any way, but that's what some of the other parties
Difficult
there...
for Rishi Sunak, it's in his backyard.
Yes, he did, I think, vote, as we were saying, vote in that area. And then this is an update from... Remember we were talking earlier about the West Midlands, where there's been a bit of a row because Labour had been briefing that they thought they were going to be on course for defeat in the West Midlands, and citing the independent candidate who was standing on a pro-Gaza ticket, saying that was a major factor. Now, a senior party source apparently had said to our political editor there, it's the Middle East, not the West Midlands, that have won Andy Street that contest. Once again, Hamas are the real villains. Now, we've had a response on the record from Labour to say that the Labour Party has strongly condemned this racist quote, which has not come from anyone who is speaking on behalf of the party or whose values are in the party. So yet again, this all
that
being...
was pretty swift and clear in terms of that condemnation. Just on the smaller parties, other parties and independents. Oh, we're going to pause now because I think Richard Moss, my colleague, has an interview with the Tees Valley Mayor, Ben Houchin.
Lord Houchin, congratulations on your victory. Obviously, Conservatives haven't done hugely well in these elections. Why do you think you won?
Because we've been able to deliver, and we've showed real delivery for people. The things that I said I would do when I was elected in 2017 and 2021, we've done. And that's not just what I'm saying. People can go out and see it in the local area. They can go and touch it and see it for themselves. People have jobs. We've increased employment by 5.4% since I was elected. Now, there's still a lot more to do, but what I think people have done is they've seen the progress that we've made, and they want to see more of that, which is why they've re-elected me for a third time.
How much do you think this was a personal vote for you, though, rather than the Conservatives? You're much more popular, aren't you, than your party, even in this part of the world?
I mean, that's very kind of you to say, Richard. I don't know. I mean, the honest answer, I just fight for every single vote. I do my best for the local area. I try and do what I think is right. And again, we can't get away from the fact that Rishi and the government have helped us a huge amount. Like I say, we're from the Treasury in Darlington to the Freeport to more help in devolution. You know, we can't do all of these things if we're not working with the government. And so I'm thankful for them for the support that they've given me.
You weren't so keen, though, to put Conservative on some of your posters, though, were you? It was very much a Ben Houchin personal campaign, and you were keen to emphasise that this was a vote about who leads locally in Westminster. That's obvious, but that might also be seen as saying, well, actually, I don't really want much association with the Conservative government in Westminster because it ain't popular.
Well, I'm not sure about that, because we had Rishi Sunak during the campaign. He came up. We were happy to show all of the fantastic work that he's done and that he's supporting us in this local area. And nobody pretends that I'm not Conservative. The people of Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool know the party that I stand for, and I've never shied away from that. But it's absolutely true to say that I've always put our area first, and I always will.
Does this, though, give any solace to Rishi Sunak that he can win a general election with Conservatives winning here in Teesside, or is it about Ben Houchin winning, really?
There's always a chance, but I keep saying that what we need as a government and as a country, the government need to continue and do better at delivering for people. The people that I'm hearing that may not be thinking about voting Conservative or are currently thinking whether they want to vote Conservative at the next general election, they want more progress. We need to give them the excuse to vote for us, and we haven't quite given them that excuse yet. But what we've seen in places like my election here is when you do deliver and you give people real, tangible results, people will back you again. So there is still a chance. There's a lot of work to do. The government needs to get on with it. But what we're also seeing is a Labour Party that threw the kitchen sink at us here. Like I said, multiple visits from Keir Starmer, most of the shadow cabinet. They were trying to pretend this was about Labour versus Conservative, and they didn't do as well as they wanted to do. I mean, they were very confident just a few days ago that they were going to win, and they haven't done it. So there's a lot to play for nationally. But again, that's for commentators and others to worry about. I'm worried about my local area and the people that I represent.
A third term, you are the mayor, but obviously there could be a change of government around the corner. Will things be quite as fun with a Labour government in charge, sending the National Audit Office potentially into that key Teesworks development, that regeneration site?
Well, what we've seen is everything we've done has been fantastic, right? We're creating thousands of jobs, huge amounts of investment, and I've already got 4 Labour leaders that I have to get agreement from anyway as part of the combined authority. So I'm used to working across party. And again, Keir Starmer came out just a few weeks ago. So if there was a Labour government, he's promised more powers and more money to mayors. So that gives me more freedom to get on and to do what I do best, which is deliver for local people.
Can Rishi Sunak deliver for the Conservatives' general election victory?
Absolutely, he can. He's got to get to work, and we've got to double down, and we've got to give people something to vote for, give people a reason to vote for us.
Ben Houchin, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was Richard Moss talking to the triumphant Ben Houchin, the Conservative candidate and incumbent in the Tees Valley. He has got a third term. He said it's up to commentators to make a decision. Cue Harry Cole. And, of course, watchers and observers, Vicky Young, need to do better. The government needs to do better at delivering. They need to make a lot more progress. The problem is there enough time?
Well, I thought the really interesting line he said there, and one that will, I imagine, would be piercing in the ears of Downing Street, is give us an excuse to vote for you. Give us something to sell on the doorstep. A takeaway, tangible retail policy, something that it's different, because what they've got at the moment just doesn't seem to be enough. And I think that without a manifesto that really has some big, eye-catching, very easy-to-explain policies on the doorstep, rather than just cooking the books on small boats and saying the word Rwanda, cost of living, effective policies, because the tax cut stuff hasn't worked. They're going to have to go further. And Ben Houchin was saying it was like he was talking to the Prime Minister there.
Yes, I mean, sending a message.
Exactly, yeah.
One here, but you could be doing
pull your
better.
Socks up.
What would that one policy be? If you were in charge, and maybe you do advise senior cabinet ministers, what would a policy be that could change the dial for the Conservatives?
I'll answer that, but I would just like to observe he did say he's a Conservative,
yes, he did.
and he did praise the Prime Minister. I'd just like to say, told you so.
Now the balance is shut. Yeah.
There's no doubt about that, is there? No doubt. And he also did say everyone knows he's a Conservative. But actually, in answer to your question, I would certainly like to see those flights taking off to Rwanda. And I think for a lot of people, they have felt that is sort of totemic of delivery. You said you would stop the small boats. We saw people dying in the Channel just last week. And actually, if we could get our immigration policy sorted out so that we can stop that from going on, I actually think would reassure lots of Reform voters to come back to us. And I think it would get a lot of Conservative voters to think, right, we'll come out and support you. But to Harry's point, we are seeing tax cuts. And as he says, they've not cut through. We are seeing inflation reduction. That's not cut through.
Right.
So actually, I think we need
that one policy, and that was it. I think we're saying goodbye to you, Andrea Leadsom, and also you, Daisy Cooper. Thank you both for joining us, and also to you,
thank you,
Harry, my guest for this first part of the show. We're holding on to Vicky Young and Ellie Reeves. It's now time for a news update with Azadeh Mashiri.
Hello, here is a summary of the BBC News. The Conservative Party has suffered heavy losses in local elections in England. The results are being seen as the last major test of public opinion before a general election due this year. The Labour Party has made significant gains, with the party also winning the Blackpool South by-election, taking the seat from the Tories. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak gave his reaction to the day's results not long ago.
Obviously, it's disappointing to lose good, hard-working Conservative councillors, and I'm grateful to them for all their service in local government, keeping council tax low and delivering services for local people. But we've still got lots of results to come as well. And there are also things that I would point to. Harlow, for example, where Keir Starmer held a rally just on Wednesday saying that was a place that he had to win to be on track to win a general election. That hasn't happened, and indeed we're still waiting for the result in the Tees Valley mayoralty just near to here, which is obviously a very important test as well.
Do you need to convince your party you can do better in a general election?
Well, as I said, if Keir Starmer was in Harlow on Wednesday saying that was a place that he needed to win in order to win the next general election, that hasn't happened. We still haven't got the results from places like Tees Valley with the mayoralty results, which again is a key battleground. I'm focused completely on the job at hand. That's delivering for people across the country. If you just look at what we're doing in the last week or so alone, a £900 tax cut hitting people's payslips, the first failed asylum seeker off to Rwanda. At the same time, what have Labour said? Well, they said that they are going to scrap the Rwanda scheme and, as far as I can tell, offer an amnesty to illegal migrants. That's no way to solve that problem, which is important to people right up and down the country.
However, there was some success for the Conservatives. Ben Houchen has won Tees Valley, giving Rishi Sunak a potential political lifeline.
So I want to thank anybody that voted for me. It's a very, very proud day. I'm delighted. Thank you for giving me your backing. Thank you for backing me over the last 7 years, and thank you for backing my plan for the next 4 years. We've run a very positive campaign. We've tried to show a clear vision of what we want for our area. We've tried to show how we can change our region for the better. Because let's be clear, there's still a long way to go, right? I'm not sat here pretending that everything's perfect, but we are making good progress. But we need to continue to tackle the problems that we have in our local area, and the plan that I've got in place is the right one. And for as long as I am there, I will continue to work as hard as I possibly can for everybody. And for those people that didn't vote for me, that's absolutely fine. I'll spend the next 4 years working doubly hard, doubling down, and I'll work even harder to make sure that I can secure your vote in 4 years' time. So I just want to thank everybody out there. But let's keep on going. Let's keep pushing. Let's keep pushing for a better Teesside, Darlington and Hartlepool. Let's deliver more jobs, more investment. And again, I just want to thank everybody. It's a really humbling experience. Thank you so much.
Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer was in Blackpool this morning and spoke to our political correspondent, Helen Catt.
Look, we want that general election, and we're confident going into that general election, because what this by-election shows is that the country wants change. This is a very clear divide now. We've had 14 years of failure and decline. We've just got chaos and division from the Tories. People want to turn the page on that and go forward with Labour and our positive plan for the country.
A former senior post office lawyer has denied a cover-up over the defects in the Horizon IT system that led to the wrongful prosecutions of sub-postmasters. Janelle Singh is back for a second time giving evidence today at the inquiry into the post office scandal. It comes as the BBC has learnt that a number of post office lawyers were aware in 2010 that a leading expert on the IT system had given contradictory information. The government has been defeated in court for a second time for not doing enough to meet its targets for cutting greenhouse gas emissions. Environmental campaigners argued that the energy minister signed off the government's climate plan for reaching net zero by 2050 without evidence it could actually be achieved. The High Court ruled today that the government will now be required to redraft that plan again. In Brazil, floods have killed over 30 people following the collapse of a dam after days of heavy rain. Over 1 million people are now without power and clean water since the storms began over the weekend. The collapse of a hydroelectric dam following days of heavy rains triggered massive flooding. More than 60 people are still believed to be missing. A Chinese spacecraft has taken off this afternoon, aiming to become the first mission to collect rock and soil samples from the so-called dark side of the moon, which is not visible from Earth. It's uncrewed aircraft, but could pave the way for China's ambitions to put a person on the moon by 2030. The 53-day mission aims to bring around 2 kilograms of lunar samples to Earth for analysis. Now back to elections 2024 with Joe Coburn.
Thank you very much and welcome back. Let me introduce new guests for this part of the election special. on Politics Live. Mark Harper, Secretary of State for Transport for the government, and Ellie Reeves is still with us from the Labour Party. Joining Vicky Young here is Rachel Cunliffe from the New Statesman. Welcome to both of you. Well, just before we went to the news, and you heard again, the Tees Valley mayoralty has been held by the Conservative Ben Houchen. He is obviously extremely pleased to hold on, and not least the Conservative Party, because that is a rare silver lining in the results that have happened overnight, because the Conservatives have lost councils across the country. But there are many more results to come, including more mayoral contests and police and crime commissioners. Labour are triumphant in Blackpool South. That was in the by-election, in the parliamentary seat there, with a historic swing from Conservatives to the Labour Party, but also Reform, who came within about 100 votes or so of the Conservative Party, and that will be very worrying for the government. I think we can go to Rochdale and talk to the MP there. Perhaps just before we do, there's George Galloway, who is the MP for Rochdale. He won in a by-election there just recently for the Workers' Party of Britain. George, just before we come to you, I just want to show you some of the analysis of areas with high Muslim populations. This is key ward analysis, changes since 2021, and you can see there that Labour has lost support, 16% down. The Greens have benefited, and they are up 14%. The Conservatives down 10%, and you can see their independents at the end have gone up 9%. Let's return to George Galloway. We had the result, George Galloway, in Oldham. Labour lost that council. But in Rochdale, where you are, there is no chance of Labour losing the council there. They are in command and only a third of the seats are up. That's right, isn't it?
Yes, although I can tell you we've won landslide victories in our two target wards and come second more or less everywhere else throughout the whole town, not just the constituency of Rochdale, but the Haywood and Middleton constituency, which is also in the borough of Rochdale. So we're the second party in the town now, which is a considerable achievement. The one thing you haven't mentioned, probably not in yet, but I'm here to tell you that we have won a landslide victory in the Longsight ward in Manchester against the deputy leader of the Labour council there. Yep. And also Blackburn. I don't know if you're across the fact that Labour have lost control of Blackburn and what used to be called a day or so ago Galloway-backed independents are now in command. Right. So I actually think, Joe, that this is a major story emerging. Not just the Labour-Tory dichotomy, but Labour's hemorrhaging of votes in traditional areas.
You're using very emotive language, landslides and hemorrhaging, but actually Blackburn, Labour's held Blackburn, just as a correction. But I take your point that you're doing well in some key wards, and these are important elections, and a reminder to the Labour Party that issues like the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza are very, very important to many voters, especially those areas with large Muslim populations. But is there any evidence, George Galloway, that this would translate into any sort of win at a general election in terms of another seat, or even your own?
Well, I don't know when landslide became a motive. If you could see the piles behind me, you'd know what I meant by landslide. But yes, I think we are in a good position against Angela Rayner, for example, not very far from here in the Longsight area.
But at a general election, George Galloway, are you saying you're in a good position at a general election?
Yeah, to win against Angela Rayner, to win in the Gorton constituency in Manchester, to win in Oldham East, to win in Blackburn, where Craig Murray, the former British ambassador, is our candidate. Yeah, absolutely. I think that can translate. I mean, and as for holding Rochdale, you can put your house on that one.
All right, I'll bear that in mind, George Galloway. I mean, just to look at the differences in terms of what is being said. about what should happen in the Israel and Gaza conflict, because Labour's ceasefire motion in the Commons in February, you'll remember, calls for Hamas to release and return all hostages and for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, which means an immediate stop to the fighting and a ceasefire that lasts and is observed by all sides. Do you disagree with any of that?
Well, millions of people in Britain don't believe that Labour is in any way interested in doing anything that will stop the rampage in Gaza. And the votes you've just been discussing with me make that clear. So they haven't persuaded me of their bona fides, but more importantly, they haven't persuaded their once very loyal vote, a core vote of the Labour Party, lost over Gaza.
All right, let me just put that to Ellie Reeves, who's a senior campaign coordinator as well as an MP for the Labour Party. What do you say to that? It's not so much what Labour is saying. George Galloway hasn't said he necessarily disagrees with what's being said by the Labour Party. They just don't believe you care.
Well, we've called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
It took a while.
We know we've got to rebuild trust with the Muslim community. We get that, and we understand people's strengthful feeling about the devastation that they see in Gaza, and the number of people that have been killed is intolerable. We've called for that immediate ceasefire. But also what we want to see is long-lasting political solutions as well. So a two-state solution and a state of Palestine. And we've made that really clear. And we know that we need to rebuild that trust with voters. But we have set out our position that we want that immediate ceasefire. We want the fighting to stop. Far too many people have been killed and it needs to stop.
Right. I mean, George Galloway, you may suspect the motive or not feel that they are sincerely held. But in terms of what's being said by the Labour Party, there's nothing there for you to disagree with.
Well, it's too little, too late, and it's not pressed with any kind of gusto at all. I was at Foreign Office Questions on Tuesday. I asked 2 questions on Gaza on Tuesday at Foreign Office Questions, but the Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, went to the dispatch box 3 times and blamed the Palestinians for a failure to achieve a ceasefire. That's the real face of Labour in this. Keir Starmer didn't hide the fact that he's an unequivocal, his word, supporter of Israel, and a very large number of formerly loyal Labour voters can't stomach that. And they showed it yesterday in the elections.
I mean, we've just heard, George Galloway, along the lines you were talking about, that Workers' Party of Britain, the party you represent, has won 2 wards in Rochdale. Is that somewhat underwhelming, bearing in mind the strength of feeling that you have been talking about amongst voters there?
No, well, we only put up 5 candidates, and these were our 2 target wards.
Okay.
And I told you they'd won by that emotive word landslide, and so we have. Across this whole area, across this whole area, and we work as a team across several boroughs.
Right.
We've won sensational results. We've even caused Labour to fail to win the West Midlands. The Galloway-backed candidate
we don't know the result.
Third.
Yeah, we don't know the result there yet. I'm just going to let you go, but briefly, who would you rather see as Prime Minister after the election, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer?
The left side or the right side of the same backside, they're just a backside for us.
Well, on that rather low moment there in terms of anatomy, anyway. George Galloway there in Rochdale. Just listening to that. Oh, yes.
Labour are calling East Midlands.
Yes.
Mayoralty. They're saying that Labour's Claire Ward has beaten Ben Bradley comfortably, and they're making the point that that covers a dozen key parliamentary battleground seats in that area, as we know lots of marginal seats
that is very important in terms of not just sentiment and psychology, but actually the sorts of seats that the Tories are going to find very difficult to hold on to then at the general election. It's a new mayoralty, and it looks as if Labour have won.
Well, look,
First of all, I'm going to wait and see the result on that before I comment. But let me just go back to something you were talking about on the mayoralties before, because I am just going to nail this nonsense coming from the Labour Party on Ben Houchen's victory, right? He absolutely stood as a Conservative. I was in his patch last week. I was delivering these leaflets that very clearly say he's a Conservative candidate. All this nonsense that somehow it's not really a Conservative win and it's not really anything to do with us. It's nonsense.
There's not much mention of the Prime Minister.
It's utter nonsense. The Prime Minister was campaigning with him, as you heard in that report. We've been working incredibly closely with him. His campaign was about delivering things, and part of that is about the money that we've given him.
He also
cancelling the
he
second
also
phase of
said voters
HS2.
He also said,
I'm going to come to that.
Hang on, but voters need an excuse.
Yeah, no,
need an excuse to vote Conservative. The National Parliament needs to deliver more in progress. I know that you want to say that this, of course, is a victory, and it is a victory.
Well, yeah,
but it was more on personal appeal. And I think all the discussion through the campaign has been that. You can spin it every way. That's your job.
You can't. You can't. Our opponents can't have it both ways. They can't say that all the losses of council seats are somehow the Prime Minister's responsibility, and then we have really strong wins. Ben Houchen and the Conservatives won every single borough across Tees Valley.
How much have they lost in terms of their share of the vote?
We won every single borough across Tees Valley. That's a set of parliamentary seats which Labour used to take for granted for decades, right?
Well, let Ellie answer that.
And they can't have it both ways. That was a strong win for the Conservative Party.
But look at Hartlepool. We took control of Hartlepool Council, for example. Ben Houchen
and Ben won that borough.
Clearly has.
And Ben won that borough.
And
he's a Conservative candidate.
But this is the point, isn't it? Ben Houchen ran a campaign which distanced himself from the Conservative.
That's not true.
I've seen the social media posts that have gone up. I've seen the leaflets, Mark. He distanced himself from the Conservative branding.
No,
and that's how you account from Hartlepool and then Ben's overall result. So, and also, there's also been a swing away from Ben as well, and I think we need to bear that in mind.
All right,
I'm sorry. Look, I was quite. I'm sorry.
You brought your cat babies, and that's fine.
Ellie,
and you're right.
Ellie just said he distanced himself from the party and pretended he wasn't a Conservative. I'm sorry. The leaflets are in our colours. They say he's a Conservative, and the Prime Minister was campaigning with him. That is not true.
All right, we've shown two pieces of campaign literature that state quite the obvious, the opposite, I should say. There's absolutely no mention of conservatism, and there's no mention of Rishi Sunak. But noted, Ben Houchen has won.
And he was quite clear in his interview, by the way, about his strong support for the Prime Minister.
Let me go back. Yes, well, I suppose he can say that now he's in the comfortable position of having won.
He said that beforehand as
well. He may have done. But I think, in general, I'm not going to rehash all of the arguments, but in general, he did not make a lot of the Conservative Party at a national level or Rishi Sunak. I just want to return, following, because there's a correction on what George Galloway had said in terms of the number of candidates being put up in council elections in Rochdale. He said it was there were sort of 5 of them, but actually there were 13, and they've won 2 wards, so many more than actually George Galloway knows about, it seems, in Rochdale. But generally, what did you make of what he had to say on this important issue and the threat to the Labour Party? Rachel?
I think George Galloway is using his platform exactly the way that you would expect him to do as an MP, and as an MP whose reason for being in Parliament seems to be to cause as much difficulty, as much trouble, as much of a headache for the Labour Party as possible. 2 things can be true. It can be true that Labour's vote among the Muslim community in areas where there is high Muslim populations is down. We've seen that in Rochdale and across other council seats. It's also the case that that isn't a significant issue when looking ahead to a general election, simply because of where those communities are based, urban areas where Labour's vote share is very high. So yes, I think it is something that Keir Starmer and the Labour Party should be aware of and should be thinking about. But in terms of a general election, the seats that they are trying to win, marginals, and where they really have to worry about shedding votes, I don't think it's as much of a challenge for them as George Galloway liked to make out just there.
Let's talk about the East Midlands mayoralty, because this was and is a new position. Labour confident, Vicky, that they were going to take this. It sounds as if they have. This question of bellwether, what we call bellwether regions, bellwether seats, it does look as if Labour is making strong progress in areas that were traditionally Labour. But the really important thing for them in terms of a majority at a general election is to make significant progress in areas like the West Midlands and the East Midlands to a certain extent. And this would certainly go towards that.
It would. I mean, Labour sources are very keen to point out the levels they have to climb to. You know, looking back at the last election under Jeremy Corbyn, how far behind they are. I mean, they say, and this is why they say, look, we don't want to be complacent, but they genuinely do really recognise how much they've got to do. You know, when people talk about the red wall and the blue wall, you know, one Labour source was saying, look, we need all the walls. We need any wall we can get our hands on, any wall we can get over, because you need to win 150 seats. You know, it's never been done before, that you need a double-digit gain in every region. So, although, of course, these results are looking very positive for Labour, they do have a long way to go. And they are definitely still slightly concerned about the stay-at-homes, about the undecided voters, because they do know that there's a huge amount of, you know, they've got a huge amount of room to make up.
Well, I hope you're good at climbing is all I can say, Ellie, after that metaphor and analogy. I'll just remind everybody of the results of the Tees Valley mayoralty. Very, very important in terms of the sentiment and mood and morale within the Conservative Party. We've had both Andrea Leadsom and now a cabinet minister talking up about how important it is and how much Ben Houchen is Conservative, which of course he is. There he is, winning with nearly 82,000 votes to Labour's challenge from Chris McEwen on just over 63,000. It's a third term for Ben Houchen, and in a moment we'll hopefully talk to Sir John Curtis to talk about how important these mayoral contests actually are. Because it's not easy, is it, to read across, either for Labour or the Conservatives, in terms of how that might play out in a general election, because these are not parliamentary seats. These are big personalities, these are big figures who have their own personal appeal. So, of course, Ben Houchen, great, because he's a Conservative. If Labour win the East Midlands, right, that's marvellous for the Labour Party. But in terms of what actually happens at a general election, how much can we take from it?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, I hope you'll be very balanced and won't. If Labour claim a lot of credit for the East Midlands result, if that goes the way you said, I hope you'll then remind everyone, you know, Ben Houchen won that as a Conservative. People can't have it both ways, right? But I just say, in terms of the read across, first of all, Ben won every borough across that region. So consistent support across Tees Valley. That's an area which was Labour for decades. I would argue they took it for granted, I think, which is part of why the delivery that Ben's been delivering has got Conservative results. If Labour were on course to do really well, they'd be having to win places like that. If they can't win a mayoralty in the Tees Valley, that tells me they're not doing well enough. And if you'll permit me just to answer Ben's...
I'll come back.
I was going to come back to answer the question you posed me about what Ben said about reasons for people to vote for the general, so I'll answer that.
Let's talk to Sir John Curtis, because hopefully he just heard what you said there in terms of Labour can't take the Tees Valley mayoralty, then are they really on course to do as well as they think? They've taken Hartlepool, John, in terms of the council having lost that by-election in 2021. What's your response to what Mark Harper has said?
Well, let's first of all, let's get it straight. I think Ben Houchen deserves every congratulation for having succeeded in holding the seat, and not only in holding the seat, but actually still, down from what he got in 2021, which was truly remarkable, but actually also doing noticeably better than he did in 2017. However, let's just look at three things, looking not just at the Tees Valley, but also West Midlands. Number one, although Ben Houchen won Hartlepool in the mayoral contest, the Labour Party still gained control of Hartlepool Council, which kind of, begins to raise questions about the read across. Secondly, as I pointed out a while ago, though I slightly underestimated the figure, one of the polls that was done about in Tees Valley, which again said it was pretty close, also asked people how they would vote in a general election. And the level of support for the Conservative Party in the general election was 21 points lower than that poll credited Ben Houchen with in terms of the mayoral vote. And you could see, if you looked at the detail of the tables, you could see very clearly that there were lots of people in the Tees Valley who were not willing to vote Conservative again, having done so in 2019, but who were still willing to vote for Ben Houchen. Thirdly, this will take us forward to tomorrow. The other story that we can expect the Conservatives to focus on, not surprisingly, is if Andy Street succeeds in defending the West Midlands. But in the West Midlands, there are 2 elections going on Thursday. One for the mayoralty and the other for the Police and Crime Commissioner. And we know from what happened in 2021, that while Andy Street won the mayoral contest, the Labour Party won the Police and Crime Commissioner contest, which does therefore again raise doubts about the extent to which we can necessarily presume that the mayoral contest is a reliable guide to what's going on more broadly. And again, in the West Midlands, the current polling also suggests that Andy Street is out-polling his party. So, every congratulations to Ben Houchen. It is a remarkable improvement. It is one of the political successes of the levelling up policy, but against a 14-point decline in Conservative support since 2021 across local councils up and down the length and breadth of England. It is, shall I suggest, it's a silver lining to the cloud, but it doesn't disperse the cloud that was hanging over the Conservatives at 6 o'clock this morning.
Well, just Haywards, what do you say to that, Mark? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, look, on the comparison with 2021, I covered that yesterday, actually, which is that was an election where we had, I think, independent people will acknowledge, not just us, a vaccine bounce. We just come off the pandemic.
Yes,
we were fastest in the world at doing it. It was our best set of local results since 2008. So, actually, we were almost certain to go back from that performance.
Yes, it's
but Ben's, and as John said, Ben improved performance from where he was in 2017. So I think that's good. So they're mixed results.
Yes,
I accept that.
But it's the
so if you want to do if you do the read across, Ben's campaign was all about having a record of delivery and a promise of more. And I think if I answer his question, the way I would answer his question that he posed is we have to be clearer and set out the things that we have achieved, and I think we've got a fantastic record on dealing with some of the real challenges that were thrown at us, like the pandemic. And one of the things I think that I hope my colleagues in Parliament will do after this set of elections is focus on that choice that faces the country at the general election between Labour and the Conservatives, get behind the Prime Minister, set out our record, and spend all of our time talking about that, all right. So that's what we focus on. And Ben's demonstrated that if you do that, then you can win.
All right, well, we'll come back to that with you and Ellie in a moment. But so, John Curtis, we were talking to George Galloway, who is the MP for Workers' Party of Britain in Rochdale. He was talking about landslides in certain wards in Rochdale and in the area as a whole for his party. And there's no doubt that in areas with large Muslim populations, Labour support has gone back. How significant is it?
Well, it's actually a little bit more subtle than that. We've done a bit more digging on Labour's difficulties in Muslim-held wards. And what you discover is that it really is a problem for Labour in Labour wards where there was already a in Muslim wards, wards with lots of Muslim voters, where Labour were particularly strong, having over half the vote back in 2021. In those wards, Labour's vote on the data we have is down by 18 percentage points. That is clearly a problem. On the other hand, if you go to wards where Labour were less strong, their support is less than 40%, then you don't see Labour struggling in anything like the same way. Now, there are a couple of things perhaps to draw out from that. One is, of course, we shouldn't necessarily assume that the only people who vote Labour who are upset about Gaza are those who identify as Muslim. There is plenty of polling evidence out there that other Labour voters are unhappy about it as well, and that perhaps, therefore, this becomes clearer in wards and in areas where there really is a strong Labour vote and where perhaps the ethos is most disturbed by what Sir Keir Starmer's stance. But the second thing, of course, if that is right, is that perhaps the loss of Muslim support has occurred above all in places where it's least likely to do Labour damage in a general election. But while I've got the air, can I just also come back to Mark Harper? Mark, yes, you are entirely right that the Conservative Party did quite well in 2021. It was about 6 points ahead in the opinion polls, which is more or less where you would need to be in order to win a general election, but no more than that. So, let's not exaggerate the position in 2021. The second thing to bear in mind is this. I think you and I would probably agree that the Conservative Party did not do terribly well last year. And on all the evidence we've got, you did not do any better this Thursday than you did 12 months ago. And that therefore the broad message of the opinion polls is corroborated by these local election results, that there has been no significant change in the gap between Conservative and Labour, and that is a gap that you do need to try and narrow.
Mark?
No, I would not disagree with that at all. The Prime Minister made it clear that these results are disappointing ones. Where we've lost councillors, that's clearly disappointing, and we are clearly behind in the polls. So I think no one's pretending that we don't have work to do. I wouldn't disagree with that at all. The point I was making was that where you've shown delivery and a good record and a good thing in the future, then we can win elections. And that's what we've got to do.
Yes.
That means there's a lot of work to do.
But I'm afraid the logic of that is the government
doable.
isn't showing delivery and therefore isn't showing progress. I mean, just to extend what you're saying, I mean, how worried are you, bearing in mind your constituency too, that Labour has gained councils right across the country? They've gained in Hartlepool, in Thurrock, in Essex, in Rushmore, in Hampshire, and in Redditch, in the Midlands. I mean, this is not just one part of the country, this is right across the country. That is difficult, isn't it, for you?
Well, and we've held on to a seat in the Tees Valley, which is an area that was traditionally Labour. Well, a mayoralty.
Yeah.
So you've got to look at both of those things. So the picture is complex. So look, I'm not pretending there isn't work for us to do, right? That would be a ridiculous position to hold, which I don't. Right? There is a lot of work for us to do. My point is we need to focus now, between now and the election, on the choice that faces the country, the fact we've got a plan, the plan is working, the fact that if you chose a Labour government, they don't have a plan, you'd go back to square one and throw away all the progress through those difficult challenges you've had on the pandemic and dealing with the impact of the war in Ukraine. And that is what we're going to have to focus on. And just to pick your point up about across the country, there's a lot of voters, if you look at those polls, that haven't made their minds up. If I take my constituency, which you referred to, I do meet people who are not super enthusiastic at the moment, but what is important is they haven't switched to the Labour Party. They want us to give them a reason to go out and vote for them, and that is the thing we've got to focus on between now and the election.
I will get a response from you, Ellie, in just a moment, but before we let Sir John Curtis go, just to pick up on that theme about Labour winning councils in different parts of the country, but a number of them were notably Leave areas in the EU referendum during those Brexit years. Is that divide, Leave and Remain, is that all but gone? Has it diminished as a sort of salient factor, or is it still there? And actually what Mark is saying is that people have stayed home, they haven't quite made up their minds yet.
Okay. The quick answer to you is, so far as the geography of support is concerned, there has been a partial reversal of the impact of Brexit on the geography of party support. That is something that was evident in the local elections in 2022 and 2023. It's not clear that it's gone much further now, but if you compare the results now with the results in 2015 and 2016, and that's one of the things we're able to do back there, you still see the Labour Party relative to 2015 and 2016 doing better in Remain voting areas and the Conservatives conversely in Leave voting areas. The second thing I would say to you is, if you look at the evidence of the opinion polls about who is voting Labour, 75% of those people who say they are going to vote Labour are current supporters of rejoining, and that figure is not down a great deal from the just over 80% of Labour supporters who backed Remain back in 2019. Actually, the party whose support has changed much more in terms of its composition is the Conservative Party support, because basically the party had so little support amongst Remain voters back in 2019, and those who voted Remain in 2016 and were willing to vote for Boris Johnson were very, very loyal Conservative voters. So they haven't gone down. The Conservative Party, on the other hand, has lost about a half of the people who believe in Brexit. So therefore, ironically, the Conservative vote is now much less of a pro-Brexit vote, much diminished as the Conservative vote now is, than it was 4.5 years ago.
Sir John Curtis, thank you very much. We'll talk to you as more results come in, but very interesting in terms of analysis and the motivations for people voting. Let's just bring you up to date with some latest results from councils across England, because, of course, these are local elections as well as mayoral elections and police and crime commissioners. Well, you can see there Castle Point, it's gained by the independents. They were certainly in a strong position, but they have gained Castle Point. Burnley is hung. That is also an area where, to some extent, Labour are coming under pressure from councillors who have quit the party. Hyndburn, that's an important gain for Labour in Lancashire. They'll be very pleased with that. Knowsley, unsurprising, that is a Labour hold. And West Oxfordshire remains hung, as does Welwyn Hatfield, and Labour have held on to Preston. Just looking, Vicky, at these results. Let's just give you some more since they have come in. Basingstoke remains hung. Barnsley is a Labour hold, and the Liberal Democrats have held on to Watford. Labour have held on to Wakefield, Blackburn, despite what we were hearing there from George Galloway, and Swindon, and they've gained. That's an important win for Labour too in Norwich. The Greens will have been strong there, but it was obviously no overall control, but Labour have gained there.
There's a confusion over Norwich, actually. I'll just...
they haven't gained it?
Well, it says we've just had something in saying we reported earlier that Labour had taken control of Norwich. This was a result of a data error, and the count is still continuing. But I don't know. That may be now updated, so we're not quite sure about that.
All right. Well, we'll hold a question mark against Norwich.
But I can tell you about from people, our BBC people in Basildon, which we like. You know, we talk a lot about Basildon as a bellwether place. But the Basildon Council is on course for being in no overall control, and a senior Tory source saying the results there are very bad for the party. So that would be going from Tory run to overall control. So, I mean, plenty of places where Labour is doing well across the country, as you say, and in areas where they are very much looking at the parliamentary seats, looking ahead to a general election, the places where they want to do well, and I think they will be thinking that in many of those places that is exactly what's happening.
Right, well, we don't know for certain, and in Basildon all the seats were actually up. It wasn't a case of thirds. I mean, that would be bad for the Conservatives, losing that to no overall control.
Well, look, every loss of a hard-working Conservative councillor is disappointing. As the Prime Minister said, I've been out campaigning with lots of councillors. They work incredibly hard, and the overall record of Conservative councils is excellent. They deliver better services at lower costs. So every council that we lose means people are going to get worse services and pay more council tax. So that is obviously disappointing.
Ellie?
I'm not sure that I recognise that statement about council tax, because actually the councils...
My local authorities, Tameside and
lowest council tax are Labour councils. I'm not quite sure that
I
recognise that statement.
Comparison.
But, you know, look, we're obviously getting the results coming in, and you mentioned the East Midlands Mayor. It's not been declared yet, but that will be a real test, I think, of a sort of barometer, if you like, because of the number of battleground seats there. But also, that's a new mayoralty. There isn't one of these big personality incumbents in that seat. And by the way, Claire Ward's our candidate there. Her leaflets were very, very, very clearly Labour leaflets. And I think that will be a really interesting test, particularly given the battleground seats that come under that East Midlands mayoral area.
Well, let's park Leafletgate just for the moment. But if that is the case, Ellie, then when it comes to the West Midlands mayoralty, are you saying that if Andy Street, the Conservative incumbent, holds on, then it looks shaky for the surrounding constituency parliamentary seats for Labour?
But Andy Street, again,
I'm sorry.
Well, all right,
double standards.
Andy Street, again, you know, if you look at a lot of his campaign literature, his social media, again, a complete lack of the Conservative branding. You know, he refers himself as the unpolitical politician. He has a sort of brand distinct from the Conservatives, and we saw, and I think Sir John Curtis mentioned that last time Andrew Street was up for election, he won, but Labour won the Police and Crime Commissioner on the exact same boundary. So he clearly does have that sort of personal following and that personal brand. And I think a lot of people in the West Midlands don't actually realise that Andy Street is a Conservative.
All right. you were going to say?
Well, look, I just thought it was a very clear attempt there to have a completely different position in one part of the country as the other. You know,
well, there's no incumbent mayor in the East Midlands.
And I just think that is a bit ridiculous. Look, and Andy Street very clearly is a Conservative. I was with him just a few weeks ago, campaigning with him as we set out the first stage of the Midlands Rail Hub. Huge amount of investment.
He's very upset, obviously, about what happened to HS2.
£1.7 billion, yes, but he's getting investment of £1.75 billion to connect Birmingham to 50 cities across the country, and he was there campaigning with me, a Conservative Cabinet Minister, on that very important policy. So he very clearly is a Conservative. If he does well, that's a win for the Conservatives in the same way Ben Houchen did.
One of the things in his favour, of course, is painting himself as a Conservative, unlike the Labour-run Birmingham local authority, which is bankrupt.
Look, local government is in a really difficult situation because of years of neglect by the Conservatives. You know, there's no long-term funding plans for local government. They have to go, you know, cap in hand, bidding for bits of funding here, bits of funding there, spending millions of pounds in the process. You know, we need a long-term funding plan for local government, and it's not just Labour councils that are in financial difficulty. There's a large number of Conservative councils, like Northamptonshire, Northumberland, Slough, that are also in difficulty.
Right, I think we can show you, although it's just disappeared from in front of me, the result in Worthing, and that's been held by Labour. Again, unsurprising, but down on the south coast, Tim Lawton, the Conservative MP, is stepping down, actually, but we can see there 45% for Labour to 37% for the Conservatives. What's interesting, if we have a look at the vote share change, it's gone up quite significantly for Labour. Again, if you're looking at areas where Labour would like to take in parliamentary elections, up 13%, down 12% for the Conservatives. We're waiting to hear if we're going to get a mayoral result in the North East. That's also a new position there. Labour very much hoping they are going to take this. The independent candidate, Jamie Driscoll, was Labour's mayor in the old seat. It has now changed, and they've got this one post. So we'll bring that to you as soon as we have noticed that it is going to be announced. But that would be an important win for Labour, and we can see that they are setting up ready to make that announcement, but we'll come back to it in just a moment. In terms of the mood for the party, Rachel, and in terms of Labour having sealed the deal, it is a slightly hackneyed phrase, but this idea that, yes, many voters, clearly from these council elections, as a barometer, have lost and fallen out of love with the Conservatives, but have they really sealed the deal in terms of enthusiasm for the Labour Party?
I think there was low turnout in various areas, particularly the Conservatives are pointing to low turnout in the Blackpool South by-election. I think if you've got low turnout and Labour are managing to get their voters out and the Conservatives aren't, that's not necessarily a win for the Conservatives or something that should comfort them. I think East Midlands mayoralty is going to be really interesting, certainly the Conservative MPs that I was speaking to in the run-up to these elections, because that will show the benefits, the strength of Conservative feeling when there isn't an incumbent. Are we getting that result now?
No, not quite yet. That's all on BBC Two. I'll be back on BBC One and BBC News in a few moments' time with continuing election results coverage.
Give me the loving! We are going to rock through time.
Oh, come on!
Catching monsters getting into scrapes. No jaw. No boss. Just fun.
Brand new Doctor Who starts Saturday the 11th of May on BBC One and iPlayer.
I'm trying. I'm making the same mistakes over and over again. Do not think of taking that girl away from me because she's all I've got left.
Everyone here just wants to make some money.
I'm scared. So am I, mate.
The new series of The Responder starts Sunday at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Three qualifiers last reached the semi-finals in 1977. Writing history live this Friday afternoon on BBC Two, in the place where dreams are made and broken.
Afternoon, we're backstage at the Honours Board here inside the Crucible Theatre, and I don't know about you, but many people felt that this year we would be writing a complete redraft of the snooker history books and inserting the name of Ronnie O'Sullivan in this box here with an 8th world title. It is not to be, and instead we have a completely different looking semi-final lineup with vibrant opportunities for all 4 men involved. Because in Jack Jones and Kyron Wilson and Dave Gilbert, they now have the opportunity to join Luca Brissell as a first-time winner. And Stuart Bingham, well, he was the man in 2015 who lifted this title at the age of 38. 9 years later, he returns, trying to become only the 7th man ever to do it twice in this great little theatre.
Wow, what a shot that is, by the way. Dave Gilbert is looking in supreme form when he gets in. Stuart Bingham was brilliant. Jack Jones played a magnificent match.
And as someone far brainier than me once said, there is nothing in life more permanent than change. And so it would appear we have a brand new look lineup in our semi-finals. And they have afforded us some permutations and possibilities that are both intriguing and really exciting. And I think exciting sums up the status of both of our semi-finals to date. This is the second day in what's a very, very long 3-day contest. Kyron Wilson is the only seed still standing, a 2020 finalist. He stayed the course then. 2 sessions to play today. Resumed 4-all with the inspirational Dave Gilbert, one of a record equalling 3 qualifiers in the semis this year. Now, world number 44 Jack Jones is the only Crucible one-table newbie. Got a torrid first taste of it last night, but turned it around remarkably against the experienced Stuart Bingham. Ball run had the chance to go 4-0